Ladies and gentlemen, Chicago didn't just push back. Chicago erupted. And tonight, we're about to see why the entire city is done playing Brandon Johnson's games. In fact, because in one stunning week, his precious $21 per employee head tax collapsed, his digital tax scheme imploded, and the very people who once cheered him on are now shouting a single word that he just can't escape: enough. This isn't politics as usual, folks. This is Revolt 2.0, a full-blown uprising from the neighborhoods that he betrayed, the businesses that he tried to punish, and the homeowners that he crushed under this 100% property tax hike. Chicago's patience just snapped, and the explosion that followed has sent shockwaves through City Hall. Guys, you're going to see exactly how the city council humiliated him, how residents in black communities turned on him with righteous fury, how even Governor Pritzker, Mr. Tax Everything himself, stepped in and said, this is a little bit too extreme, guys. And remember, this is all happening under President Donald J. Trump, a man who promised that failed blue city mayors would finally be exposed. And well, here we are. Chicago's living it in real time. We've got it all today, just the raw truth, the full breakdown, the emotional fire that Chicago's own residents unleashed on a mayor who pushed them too far. Stick with me, guys, because every minute of what you're about to see and hear, this builds toward a moment that will leave you saying exactly what Chicago just said this week: enough. Hit the like button and subscribe. Chicago didn't just reject Brandon Johnson's head tax. No, they obliterated it. The finance committee sat there, looked at his $21 per employee scheme and said, absolutely not. Even the progressive alderman who once carried his water called it dangerous, reckless, and a direct attack on Chicago jobs. Business owners warned that it would force layoffs overnight. Union-friendly members quietly admitted that it was political suicide. And when the votes came down, Johnson's signature revenue plan, the one that he swore was going to save Chicago, collapsed in front of him like a wet cardboard. And the moment that the head tax died, Chicago residents erupted, not in relief, but in fury, because they remembered what he already did to them: a 100% property tax increase that blindsided homeowners citywide. Drop a fired down below if your city mayor dropped a 100% property tax and you think that they should be fired, because people who were barely hanging on felt the walls closing in again as Johnson floated yet another tax avalanche. Black homeowners in Lawndale, Austin, South Shore, the very communities that he claims to champion, they felt targeted, betrayed, financially ambushed. And so when the latest plan collapsed, they didn't cheer. They asked the real question: why was he trying to bleed us again? So what happened next stunned even longtime Chicago watchers. Johnson's own political allies openly broke ranks. Aldermen who once marched beside him suddenly drew a hard line. They called the head tax a non-starter, a misguided grenade, and a threat to an already bleeding economy. You could feel the shift, the Chicago machine distancing itself from the mayor that they helped elect. Behind closed doors, council members whispered that Johnson no longer had the credibility, the leverage, or even the competence to lead. In public, the gloves came off. In private, they said that he's finished. You know, this is exactly why the media landscape is in such a mess right now. Information spreads faster than anyone can even verify it. Algorithms shove us into these echo chambers, and half the headlines that we see are engineered just to keep us hooked, not to keep us informed. And this is exactly why I started using Ground News. This is an app and website that pulls from over 50,000 sources worldwide and shows you the bias, the factuality, and the ownership behind every story. Just take a look at this story on Ground News about Trump's new healthcare overhaul. It's been covered by over 20 sources, with 60% leaning left and 40% leaning right. One headline blames Trump for destabilizing coverage, and another one is praising Trump for restoring choice. Ground News lets you see every angle instantly, and it's why I partner with them. You get global viewpoints, spot media blind spots, and sharpen your critical thinking. So use my link down below, ground.news/Ron Yates, or use the QR code on your screen right now to get 40% off their Vantage plan and unlock every feature. But the head tax wasn't the only collapse. In fact, it triggered a domino effect that took down Johnson's entire digital tax fantasy. So his social media tax, dead. His cloud tax, stalled. His AI software use tax, torn apart by analysts who said that it would cripple every startup in the city. One by one, the proposals fell like cheap dominoes, exposed as nothing more than desperate attempts to plug a billion-dollar deficit that he himself created. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. This wasn't bold reform. This was a mayor flailing, grasping, scrambling, and losing control of Chicago's future. And so as these tax proposals unraveled, Chicago's business community unloaded on Johnson with a fury we haven't seen in years. The Chamber of Commerce warned the head tax would spark immediate layoffs. Small business owners said that they'd freeze hiring to avoid crossing the 100 employee threshold. Tech workers blasted the cloud and software taxes as a death blow to innovation. Even nonprofit employers said that the mayor was treating jobs like a crime. Companies weren't just frustrated, they were alarmed. Johnson wasn't misunderstanding their needs, he was punishing them for existing. And then came the humiliation that no mayor wants, a public rebuke from Governor J.B. Pritzker, a man famous for loving new taxes. Yet even he said that Johnson's head tax was foursquare opposed to job creation and warned that it would devastate Chicago's economy. When Pritzker, the tax titan himself, tells you that your idea is a little bit too extreme, you already know you've crossed into dangerous territory. Now, Johnson wasn't just isolated, he was exposed. For the second time this year, the governor treated him like a political liability, and Chicago saw that. Everybody saw it. So as Chicago reeled from Johnson's tax explosions, another bomb dropped. The revelation that he rejected the $1.4 billion in cost savings recommendations from Ernst & Young, savings that would have wiped out the deficit without raising a single tax. So the city paid $3 million for this report, only for Johnson to completely ignore almost all of it. Residents were furious, business owners were stunned, even aldermen asked, why tax the people when the money is already there? The answer became painfully clear. This crisis isn't financial, it's political, and Johnson chose ideology over responsibility. And before we move forward, guys, I need to say this, because every year somebody writes me with the same heartbreaking message, I wish I called sooner. And they mean it, because Medicare mistakes don't stay cheap. They get more and more expensive over time. And this is why I partner with Chapter. They fix those regrets before they happen by reviewing your Medicare plan for free for the Ron Yates community. And one of our viewers called and said, if I hadn't called when I did, it would have cost me thousands. Now think about that for a second, okay? So let me ask you directly, why wait to regret it, right? Now, most people aren't waiting. They're calling the phone number right there at the bottom of your screen, or they're visiting askchapter.org/Ron. And that phone number again is 909-563-8279. Just make sure that you're not overpaying or missing benefits that you've earned. Now, Pat Sable, one of our viewers, she left a comment and said, thank you for introducing me to Chapter. I'm saving $95 a month. Guys, this is the kind of relief that people really feel when they finally check their plan. So this betrayal from Mayor Brandon Johnson has fueled an eruption unlike anything that Chicago has seen in years. So at city meetings, residents, including black residents, unleashed raw, unfiltered anger. They shouted that Johnson ignored crime, abandoned buildings, failed schools. They accused him of funding illegal migrants while their neighborhoods crumble. Now, one woman's voice shook the entire chamber as she told him, "You're not about that life." These weren't political opponents. These were the very people that he claims to fight for. And in those rooms, with voices raised and fists shaking, Chicago sent a message: enough. Now, the anger didn't appear out of nowhere. It was rooted in the brutal fallout from Johnson's 100% property tax hike, which hit black neighborhoods the hardest. So in Lawndale, residents gathered around a liberal bonfire meeting, demanding answers as their bills doubled while their blocks remained neglected. They spoke about decades of disinvestment, only now being taxed for prosperity that they've never even seen. Some push for Prop 13 style reforms, others just begged to keep their homes. Johnson promised to uplift these communities, but instead he pushed them closer and closer to the edge. And so while families are struggling to pay those skyrocketing taxes, another insult reemerged. The Chicago Teachers Union, Johnson's former employer, blew nearly $8 million on luxury trips, while CPS faced a $734 million deficit. Staff jetted to Egypt, Finland, South Africa, Vegas. Many ignored spending limits or just completely skipped approval entirely. And Johnson? Silent. Residents saw it as corruption disguised as professional development, a union first, city last mentality. It confirmed what many had feared. Johnson protects his political base, not the students, not the neighborhoods, and certainly not the taxpayers' foot in the bill. So at this point, A new narrative surged through Chicago. Johnson's ideology isn't just misguided, it's economically destructive. Residents and business leaders alike calling him a textbook socialist, someone who sees private enterprise as a threat rather than a partner. His attempts to tax jobs, tax tech, tax innovation, all while ignoring billions in savings, looked less like governance and more like an ideological crusade. People feared that he was pushing companies out on purpose, and the message spreading across the city was simple: Chicago cannot survive this kind of leadership. Meanwhile, the crime continued to soar, and residents were done. They're done pretending otherwise. So at community meetings, people shouted that the mayor ignores violent crime while obsessing over conferences and ideological agendas. They pointed to abandoned buildings, lawless blocks, and children walking to school through danger zones. Johnson's refusal to prioritize safety, it became a symbol of everything wrong with his administration. Instead of restoring order, he spent time on political theater. Instead of backing the police, he lectured about systems and oppression. And every day, Chicagoans felt more and more abandoned and more enraged. So as neighborhoods begged for investment, Johnson doubled down on every woke cause imaginable. While schools closed and property taxes exploded, he found time to headline racism conferences, celebrate Trans Day of Visibility, and expand benefits for illegal migrants. Residents looked around at the failing infrastructure, boarded up storefronts and schools where children can't read, and asked, how is this the priority? It became the breaking point. Chicagoans felt mocked, ignored, and lectured while their real problems, crime, affordability, education, they were sidelined for activism that did nothing to improve their lives. And the harshest criticism didn't come from conservatives. It actually came from the black voters who put Johnson in office to begin with. They accused him of siding with illegal immigrants over longtime residents, funneling money into shelters while ignoring families who've lived in Chicago for generations. Some shouted, he's selling us out. Others told him directly, you're not about that life. The message was unmistakable. Johnson didn't just betray opponents, he betrayed his base. And once your supporters revolt, the political death spiral has already begun. Nothing captured Johnson's unraveling more clearly than the now infamous moment that he was asked about his catastrophic 76% disapproval rating. So instead of addressing Chicago's frustration, he rambled on and on about being a middle child and bragged that the Bears were undefeated, as if deflection could erase reality. Viewers watched a mayor visibly out of touch with a city in crisis. The exchange didn't calm fears, it confirmed them. Chicago didn't see confidence, they saw delusion, denial, and a man who had lost control of the narrative and the city itself. Now, behind the scenes, panic spread through Chicago's business sector. Employers warned that if Johnson revived any version of the head tax or digital tax package, they would be forced to downsize or leave the city entirely. Some quietly explored suburbs or out-of-state options. Others said that they would cap hiring at 99 employees permanently. Tech founders feared innovation would die under punitive software and cloud taxes. The message from industry leaders was unmistakable. Chicago is hanging by a thread, and Johnson's agenda, it threatens to snap it. And once employers go, they don't come back. And so now the feeling across Chicago was undeniable. The city was entering a full-blown breaking point. Residents, aldermen, business leaders, even former Johnson supporters agreed that the mayor's leadership had become reckless and destabilizing. People talked about the city like it was teetering on the edge of a cliff. $1 billion deficit, skyrocketing taxes, businesses preparing to flee, schools collapsing, crime spiking, migrants overwhelming shelters. The energy shifted from frustration to urgency. Chicago wasn't venting anymore. Chicago was warning. And the warning was simple: keep this up and the city breaks. The final sign of collapse came when Johnson's own base, activists, progressives, social justice organizers began walking out on him. The same crowds that once cheered him on now interrupted his events, shut down his speeches, and demanded answers he couldn't give. His coalition fractured in real time. At a racism conference, his supposed safe space, he was drowned out by disruptions. Even the woke left had turned. That's when Chicago realized Johnson wasn't just losing the city, he was losing everyone. And politically, that isolation is fatal. So as Chicago unraveled, the national spotlight intensified, especially under President Donald J. Trump, who promised America that failed Democrat-run cities would finally be held accountable. Chicago became Exhibit A. Conservative economists, governors, even members of Trump's team pointed to Johnson's collapse as proof that progressive tax and spend policies were unsustainable. Even independent voters began echoing Trump's warnings about fiscal mismanagement and anti-business governance. Chicago residents, desperate for stability, they started demanding federal oversight or intervention. Now, for the first time in years, they felt Washington might understand what they were living through and act. And that brings us to the final turn. This is the moment that Chicago residents just stopped complaining and they started planning. Calls for recall, resignation, or outright removal spread across neighborhoods and community forums. People who once defended Johnson now argued that he'd become a danger to the city's survival. Aldermen privately discussed succession scenarios. Business groups explored political alternatives. Grassroots organizers openly talked about who could rebuild what he destroyed. Chicago wasn't angry. Chicago was ready to move on. And when a city reaches that point, the end is no longer a question. It's a countdown.